If you think one woman sitting in the wrong seat can't shake an empire, think again. They told her to move. She refused. They smiled politely, then threatened her with security. What they didn't know, she wasn't just a passenger. She was the power behind the systems they depended on. A quiet black woman in seat 1A, armed not with outrage, but with ownership. By the time her plane took off, without her, 3 careers would be ruined. An airline would be forced to shut down, and an entire industry would face a reckoning. And it all started with one seat. The scent of citrus and leather hung in the air as I stepped into the Skylux first-class cabin, the kind of space engineered to whisper wealth. Everything gleamed. Brushed steel accents, plush cream seats, attendants in tailored uniforms with expressions carved in calm professionalism. I moved quietly to seat 1A, the window seat I had selected and paid for weeks ago. It wasn't just a preference. It was a small, intentional luxury I allowed myself in a world that so often demanded I shrink. I placed my briefcase carefully beside my feet, slipped off my blazer, and took a breath. From the corner of my eye, I noticed her, tall, slim, tailored in a pewter pantsuit, platinum blonde hair in a perfect chignon. She boarded with an air of practiced entitlement, heels clicking like declarations down the aisle. She stopped directly beside me and frowned. Her lips curved into something resembling a smile, but the ice in her gaze betrayed her discomfort. "You're in my seat," she said flatly. I looked up slowly. "This is seat 1A, yes?" "Yes, it's my seat. I always sit here." Her tone was not uncertain. It was commanding, like someone speaking to a housekeeper who'd forgotten her place. I offered a polite smile, reached into my wallet, and pulled out my boarding pass. "I'm assigned 1A, platinum status." Her eyes flicked to the ticket in my hand, but ignored it. "I'm Lorraine Chambers," she said, as if that should clarify everything. "This seat is usually reserved for me. Ask anyone." Before I could respond, a flight attendant approached. Blonde, composed, name tag reading Jessica. "Is everything all right here?" Her voice was sugar-sweet, but her glance skipped over me to focus on Lorraine. "This woman's in my seat," Lorraine said, with a soft laugh like we were all in on the joke. Jessica turned to me. "Miss Morgan, Brielle Morgan." She smiled tightly. "Miss Morgan, there may have been a mix-up. This seat is typically held for returning first-class members like Ms. Chambers. Would you mind relocating to 3A? It's just as spacious." I kept my tone even. "I'm a platinum member. This seat was booked in my name 2 weeks ago. I have confirmation if you need it." Jessica hesitated, her eyes scanning my boarding pass. Something flickered in her expression. Annoyance? Surprise? Pity? She quickly smoothed it out. "I understand, ma'am. It's just, Ms. Chambers is one of our long-standing clients. We try to prioritize continuity for our elite flyers." "Continuity doesn't override confirmed reservations," I said. I was still smiling, but my voice carried a quiet steel. Jessica blinked. "Of course. Let me just double-check with the supervisor." She turned quickly and disappeared up the aisle. Lorraine didn't move. Instead, she leaned slightly closer. "I've flown this route every week for the past 5 years. That seat is always mine. I don't know how you got it, but..." She let the sentence hang there like a stench. I turned back toward the window, choosing silence. A few rows back, I noticed a middle-aged man pull out his phone and aim it discreetly in our direction. A woman in 2D whispered to her husband, eyes locked on Lorraine. Jessica returned, this time with a different expression. Forced neutrality, tight around the jaw. "Miss Morgan, I'll ask one more time. Would you please relocate to 3A?" "No," I said, without raising my voice. "I paid for this seat. I have status. I'm staying here." Jessica opened her mouth, then stopped. Her gaze darted toward Lorraine, who now stood with her designer bag tucked beneath one elbow and an amused smirk playing at her lips. What happened next was subtle but definitive. As Jessica turned slightly toward Lorraine, Lorraine reached into the inner pocket of her coat, pulled out what looked like a folded bundle of crisp bills, and slipped it, smoothly, expertly, into Jessica's hand as she adjusted her scarf. Jessica didn't react at first. Then her fingers closed around the cash with a practiced ease and tucked it quickly into the side pocket of her uniform. It was all so seamless, so silent, so venomously ordinary. I felt it in my gut before I fully processed it in my mind. "I'd like to speak with the cabin supervisor," I said. Jessica hesitated. "He's currently preparing for departure." "Then I'll wait." Behind me, another phone camera clicked on. Someone whispered, "Is she seriously being bribed right now?" Jessica straightened. "I'm simply trying to ensure all our guests are comfortable, Miss Morgan." "Then let me sit in the seat I paid for." Her smile dropped entirely now. "Very well. I'll notify the supervisor." She turned and strode briskly toward the cockpit. Lorraine gave me a glance, filled with barely concealed disdain, and perched herself against the bulkhead divider, like a queen awaiting her throne. For a moment, everything felt quiet, but not peaceful. The kind of quiet you get before a storm. I sat tall, not because I was defiant, but because I knew every part of this moment had happened to people like me before. I knew how it felt to be treated like an invader in a space you'd earned your right to occupy. I had seen enough boardrooms, courtrooms, and classrooms to understand this wasn't about airline policy. It was about something older, deeper, more dangerous. And I wasn't going to move. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I simply reached into my handbag, pulled out my phone, and began recording. Quietly, calmly. The screen glowed back at me, capturing the corners of faces now tinged with tension and judgment, and the seat that had become a symbol of something far bigger than a travel dispute. The screen reflected my own image too, poised, composed, but burning inside. Not with rage, with clarity. I tapped out a text with one hand. Clip started. Possible escalation. Prepare comms. Sent to Natalie, my head of public relations, who had been prepped months ago for exactly this kind of moment. Not because I predicted this flight, this woman, this crew, but because I knew it would happen somewhere, sooner or later. My thumb hovered briefly before typing a second message, this time to Jason, my general counsel. Documentation complete. Video live backup uploading now. Then I activated Cloud Sync. It wasn't for drama. It was for protection. I'd seen too many moments like this vanish under corporate rugs. A quiet flame lit inside me, steady and familiar, one I'd carried for a decade. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes for a second. Not to escape, but to remember. 10 years ago, I'd walked into a high-end steakhouse in Chicago. I was 22, fresh out of undergrad, nervous in my newly thrifted blazer and clutching my resume folder. I had an interview scheduled with a partner from a consulting firm. The hostess had smiled at the couple behind me, led them to their table, then turned back to me with a dismissive flick of her eyes. "We're full tonight. I have a reservation. 6:30, Morgan." She tapped her iPad. "It's not showing. I'm sorry. Maybe you want to try somewhere else?" I'd watched as two more groups walked in after me and were seated promptly. I waited 30 minutes before the partner called to say, "I was told you never showed." The job went to someone else. And just like that, I'd learned something. The world doesn't always need to scream to push you out. Sometimes it just smiles, shrugs, and lets the door swing closed behind you. That moment had defined me, not with bitterness, but with resolve. I opened my eyes. The cabin hummed with a strange electricity. Conversations that had once been soft and disconnected now circled like clouds, thickening before a storm. I heard whispers from 2D. "This feels wrong," a woman murmured. "She has the card, the pass, everything," her husband replied. I could sense eyes flicking toward me, toward Lorraine, and back again. Some avoided looking altogether. Then a voice broke the silence behind me. Calm, measured, but firm. "This is unacceptable." I turned slightly. A man in seat 3C had stood up. He was black, maybe in his 40s. dressed in a gray suit with a navy tie and tortoiseshell glasses. His presence was quiet but undeniable. "She's not doing anything wrong," he said, louder now. "She paid. She has her card. What exactly is the issue?" Jessica, who had returned minutes before and stood stiffly by the galley, looked visibly uncomfortable. "We're handling the situation, sir," she replied, trying to smooth her tone. "No," he said, stepping forward into the aisle. "You're mishandling it. I've flown Skylux for 8 years. I've seen how some passengers get treated and how others get coddled. And I'm tired of the pattern." Lorraine rolled her eyes. "Oh, here we go." He turned to her. "You've said enough." Another passenger began recording. I caught a glimpse of a phone screen in row 4A lighting up. Jessica took a small step back, her eyes darting toward the cockpit again. I remained silent, still focused. The man turned to me. "Miss, I don't mean to intrude, but if you need someone to vouch, I'll give a witness statement. This is not okay." I met his eyes. "Thank you," I said softly, "but I'm not going anywhere." He nodded, as if we were soldiers in the same silent war. The intercom chimed above. Jessica whispered something into her handheld radio. I caught pieces of it. "Supervisor inbound. Possible disturbance. Request review." I knew that tone. It wasn't, "We have a problem." It was, "We're about to make you the problem." I kept recording, not because I was afraid anymore, but because I was done not recording. I wasn't going to fight, scream, curse, or beg. That's what they'd expect. That's what they'd be ready to use against me. Instead, I would sit. I would document. And I would let the world see what silent prejudice looks like in real time. The cabin had changed. People were tense. Lorraine, still leaning smugly near the divider, folded her arms. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "I should have been halfway through my Chardonnay by now." I didn't flinch. In that moment, I wasn't just Brielle Morgan, CEO. I wasn't just a platinum member or a wronged passenger. I was the quiet flame they hadn't noticed until it was too late, and I had no intention of going out. The shuffle of polished shoes against the carpet was soft, but every passenger felt it. Daniel Grant entered the first-class cabin like a thundercloud in a tailored navy blazer. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried a leather-bound flight operations tablet like it was a badge of rank. His presence was abrupt and serious, the kind that sucked the oxygen from the room. Jessica straightened the moment he appeared, stepping slightly aside as if yielding control. Lorraine, of course, perked up like a show dog whose owner had finally arrived. She tossed her hair with mock innocence and said, just loud enough, "It's about time." Daniel ignored her. His focus was locked on me. "Miss Morgan," he began, his voice low and even. "I'm Daniel Grant. I supervise first-class operations for this flight. There appears to be a dispute about your seat." "There's no dispute," I replied calmly. "This is seat 1A. It's on my ticket. I'm a platinum member. I arrived early. I boarded when called." He paused, reading something on his tablet. Then he looked back at me. "This seat is frequently pre-assigned to long-standing patrons such as Ms. Chambers. She's occupied it for years." "But not today," I said. "Today it was assigned to me, and I've done nothing wrong." Several passengers behind me were now fully invested. The man from 3C had resumed recording. A woman across the aisle leaned forward, visibly anxious. Jessica fidgeted at Daniel's side. He took a breath, clearly unused to being challenged. "Miss Morgan, I'm going to ask you once, professionally, to relocate to another first-class seat so that we can avoid any further escalation. Is there an issue with my payment? My membership status? No. Did I violate any policy? No. Then I won't be moving." The air tightened. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he tapped at his tablet, pretending to check something, stalling. I watched his jaw work beneath his skin, like gears straining inside a broken machine. This wasn't about rules. This was about restoring the normal order he was comfortable with. He just didn't know how to say that aloud. "Miss Morgan," he said, a shade less polite now. "You're refusing a reasonable request to assist our operations. That could be interpreted as non-compliance. Reasonable would be asking the person who didn't book this seat to relocate." His eyes narrowed. "I'm advising you as the cabin authority to move." "And I'm declining." Whispers rippled through the cabin. A younger woman in 2F muttered, "This is messed up." Jessica glanced at Daniel, unsure. Lorraine, meanwhile, produced a noise of bored disbelief and tapped her heels rhythmically on the floor. Daniel's professionalism cracked ever so slightly. "If this continues, I will have no choice but to escalate to the flight deck." "Then escalate," I replied. "I'm not giving up my seat." He blinked, taken aback. For a second, his eyes betrayed a flash of something I'd seen before in boardrooms and negotiations. The panic of someone losing the control they assumed was theirs by default. He turned without another word and walked briskly toward the front of the cabin. Jessica stayed rooted in place. I could see the muscles in her jaw clench. She still hadn't looked me in the eyes since the bribe. Passengers murmured, some louder now. Cameras were no longer hidden. They were out, obvious, and watching. Moments later, the cockpit door clicked open. Out stepped Captain Miller. Unlike Daniel, the captain's expression was unreadable, well-trained, honed over years of command. He looked around the cabin, taking in the tension, the cameras, the still unguarded smirk on Lorraine's face. He approached slowly, flanked by Daniel and Jessica. As he reached me, he placed one hand lightly on the back of seat 1B. "Miss Morgan," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "I've been informed of a situation regarding seating." "There is no situation. I'm in my assigned seat. Everything else is manufactured." He studied me for a long second, like I was an equation he couldn't quite solve. "I want to avoid unnecessary disruption," he continued. "Our policy allows the flight crew to adjust seating to ensure guest satisfaction and maintain order." "You mean to placate entitlement?" "Miss Morgan," he said sharply, "I'm asking you to comply. And I'm telling you I already have. I complied when I booked. I complied when I paid. I complied when I boarded. I am not the disruption here." He exhaled through his nose. The professionalism was starting to wear thin. "If you continue to refuse, I will need to involve airport security." "And if you do," I said, locking eyes with him, "you'll have to explain why you forcibly removed a paying platinum member from her assigned seat to appease someone who offered a bribe." Jessica flinched. Lorraine froze. Miller's mouth twitched. "I suggest you think very carefully about what happens next," I added. There was a long, dense silence. I could hear the soft hum of the engine outside. The passengers were statues, holding their breath. Captain Miller straightened. "This is your final warning," he said. "Refuse again, and I'll order security to escort you off this aircraft." I leaned back, phone still recording, posture relaxed, eyes clear. "Then call them," as Captain Miller walked away, signaling someone with a clipped nod. I felt it. The click of a line being crossed. Not a line drawn in policy or passenger etiquette, but in something deeper. I glanced at the flickering LED light above my seat and then down at the phone still recording in my hand. The camera caught the backs of retreating uniforms, the silence of spectators, and the tension that had taken root in every polished surface of this luxury cabin. I turned the phone horizontally, switched to split screen, and opened my email app. My fingers moved with precision, the way they always did in moments of pressure. I had written this draft weeks ago. The subject line was already there. Emergency escalation, passenger rights violation, immediate action required. I updated the timestamp and appended a 30-second video clip showing Daniel's threats and the captain's ultimatum. Then I addressed it to the top. To Richard.Vance@SkyluxExecutive.com, board@Skylux shareholders. Net Jason.Cray@rightlegal.us cc. Natalie.deho@rightcom.us, Liam.Rosen@rightstrategy.ai. I added one line. "This incident is now active. Video evidence attached. We proceed as discussed. I tapped send. Just like that, the fire moved beyond the cabin. Next, I opened a secure app, one designed by my company, Right Tech Solutions. I scrolled to Exec Override Channels and tapped the first contact. Evelyn Liu. Strategic Chair, Skylux AI Implementation. The call rang twice. Then her voice, sharp and alert, filled my AirPods. Is it happening? I responded with a calmness that belied my surroundings. Yes, stage 1 initiated. You'll see the footage in 30 seconds. Trigger board review protocol. Audit team pre-clearance? Ready. I'm pushing it now. Good. Then I whispered what I'd rehearsed only once before, alone, on a dry-run Zoom call 2 months ago. The countdown begins. I hung up. Jessica watched me from across the aisle, fidgeting with a tray of unused champagne flutes. Daniel stood near the galley, whispering harshly into a headset. Lorraine was back in her corner, phone in hand, smiling as if she'd already won. She didn't know that I had just detonated the first charge beneath her glass fortress. From the outside, I must have looked calm, too calm, the kind of stillness that made people suspicious, as if I knew something they didn't, because I did. By the time Daniel re-entered the cabin, something had shifted. Not in the passengers, many of whom were still fixated on their phones, but in the atmosphere. The artificial calm of first class had been replaced by the kind of quiet that precedes either turbulence or truth. He approached with a tight jaw. Security has been notified. They'll meet us at the gate before departure. I nodded once. Thank you for the update. It clearly rattled him. He expected pushback, pleading, maybe even tears. What he got was a woman typing into a second device, my tablet this time, now connected via tethered hotspot to my phone. On the screen, a dashboard with charts, metrics, and a live update ticker that read, Right System Override Protocol, Stage 1, Escalated. Status, Confirmed Board Access, Enabled Audit Signal, Sent. I slid it back into my tote. Anything else? I asked Daniel. He faltered. Do you understand what's happening here? Yes, I said. And by the time we reach taxi clearance, everyone will too. 2 rows behind, a woman with salt and pepper hair turned to her companion and whispered, I think she's more than just a platinum member. Her husband leaned in. What makes you say that? She's not flustered. She's prepared. The young man in 3C, who had defended me earlier, now stared with dawning realization. He pulled out his phone again and checked something, maybe a business profile, maybe a headline. He looked up at me, eyebrows raised. That was the first moment the cabin began to suspect that this was more than just another case of discrimination. This was a reckoning, meticulously planned. Minutes passed. I didn't speak. I didn't flinch. I watched the shifting faces, the twitching glances toward crew, and the devices now silently capturing it all. Lorraine finally broke the silence. I've never seen such drama over a seat. You'd think she was royalty, she sneered, half laughing. I turned my head, met her eyes. I'm not royalty, I said evenly, but I do own the tech platform that runs 62% of Skylux's customer interface. She blinked. And I also hold a significant equity stake through Right Tech's investment arm, 27% if you want to be exact. Lorraine scoffed. You're bluffing. Jessica's hand went limp. The tray tilted slightly in her grip. Try me, I said. The passengers weren't whispering anymore. Now they were just staring. Someone muttered, Wait, did she say 27%? The man across the aisle looked at his phone, mouth slightly open. She's Brielle Morgan, the AI ethics CEO. Right Tech. Another added, I read her interview last month. She's implementing fairness protocols for luxury brands. Daniel paled. Lorraine's lips parted, her bravado crumbling like ash. Jessica backed toward the galley, as if hoping the bulkhead would swallow her. Captain Miller reappeared, his expression unreadable. but there was a hint of calculation behind his eyes. He scanned the scene, saw the sea of phones, the still recording passengers, and the woman at the center of it all. Me. I looked at him and said, "Captain, before you proceed with the removal order, I'd advise you to check your inbox. Your board has likely issued new guidance." He didn't respond, but his earpiece crackled to life. Then his face changed, only slightly, but enough. And that was when everyone in first class knew something massive had just begun. It took less than 30 minutes. One passenger uploaded the footage to TikTok, another to Twitter. By the time the plane door had even closed, the video had over 45,000 views. A woman's calm refusal, a crew's thinly veiled coercion, a captain's escalation, and then the moment that ignited it all. "She owns the damn tech behind the airline." The quote had been captured clearly by a teenager in 4D. It became the unofficial title of the clip. By the time Captain Miller stepped into the cockpit again, his name was trending. By the time Jessica tried to discreetly step out of sight, people online had already screenshot her face. By the time Lorraine angrily muttered, "She's bluffing," commenters had found her LinkedIn, her law firm bio, and even a photo of her sipping champagne in the exact same seat on a previous flight, smug and glowing. The first hashtag to trend was simple: "Justice for Brielle." The second came a bit later: "Ethics over privilege." Then came the deep dives. Investigators, both amateur and professional, uncovered everything. Brielle Morgan, CEO and founder of Right Tech Solutions, creator of RightCore, the AI-powered ethics surveillance and fairness optimization engine used by multiple Fortune 100 service companies, including Skylux Airlines. Her face had been on Fast Company 2 months ago. She'd been a keynote speaker at the Global AI Responsibility Forum. Time had listed her among the 100 most influential women in tech. And now, she had just been publicly told to move because someone else always sat there. You couldn't script irony that brutal. In Skylux's downtown HQ, Richard Vance, the CEO, was pulled from a late breakfast meeting when his VP of Communications slid a phone in front of him. He watched the clip, stone-faced, as the ending line played. "Captain, before you proceed with the removal order, I'd advise you to check your inbox. Your board has likely issued new guidance." His phone vibrated again. The company group chat lit up. Legal counsel, strategic partners, PR, investors. The first internal message he opened came from Evelyn Liu. Subject: urgent. Right Tech override alert. All stakeholders affected. The second was worse. Live dashboard engagement. 120K plus mentions in under 30 minutes. By the time Vance's assistant entered with an armful of press alerts, Justice for Brielle had topped global trends. In India, in the UK, in Brazil. Back in the cabin, I remained still, silent. But everything was moving. The man in 3C leaned over and showed me his screen. "You're going viral." I nodded. "Good." Jessica walked down the aisle, pale. She was no longer pretending to be composed. Lorraine had retreated to her seat, legs crossed tightly, phone clutched like a lifeline. But her screen was betraying her too. 1,000 notifications, dozens of headlines with her full name, screenshotted from her firm's website. Her privilege had once been armor. Now it was evidence. The other passengers didn't try to hide their reactions anymore. Some applauded quietly. Others just looked stunned. The first-class cabin had morphed from a space of polite detachment to one of public accountability. A young woman across from me whispered, "She built the very system they're using to target her." And that was the real twist. Because while the public now knew I was a major shareholder, what most of them hadn't realized until that day was this. Right Tech didn't just build Skylux's customer service AI, it powered the ethical compliance layer that reviewed employee behavior, decision-making patterns, loyalty status enforcement, and complaint resolution across every level. From airport check-in to in-flight operations, the system wasn't just software, it was infrastructure, a backbone. And I was the architect of it. Right Core had been licensed to Skylux 2 years ago as part of a major push to clean up their history of inconsistency and premium service delivery. Since then, customer satisfaction had skyrocketed. AI-aided conflict resolution had reduced in-flight complaints by 34%, and PR scandals had, until now, been rare. But the irony was too rich to ignore. The woman who built the fairness engine had just been discarded by the humans who refused to use it. I hadn't needed to raise my voice or demand retribution. I had designed a system that already saw what they did. And now, the world saw it too. The first media headline to drop came from Business Insider. Skylux Airlines faces backlash after forcibly removing CEO of their own ethics tech provider. CNN followed with, "She wrote the rules. They broke them anyway." Even Fox News, typically indifferent to such stories, ran a segment titled, "Elite Airline Faces Reckoning After Kicking Out Their Own AI Ethics Partner." But what truly made the storm viral was relatability. Thousands of viewers left comments beneath the video. "I've been ignored like this in customer service because of how I look." Imagine building the system only to be denied by it. Her silence is more powerful than any speech. Some shared their own footage. One passenger had caught Lorraine slipping the money into Jessica's pocket. Another had recorded Daniel's threat, up close. A journalist tweeted, "Skylux's biggest error wasn't just the discrimination. It was underestimating a woman who built their conscience." And as the internet erupted, I remained seated. I didn't gloat. I didn't speak to the press. I just watched the sky outside the cabin window, gray clouds passing gently, unaware that a storm had already broken loose below. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been told in 1,000 quiet ways that they didn't belong. And now, we were all watching. At 9:38 a.m., the skylit boardroom on the 43rd floor of Skylux's Manhattan headquarters was a war zone in suits. What had begun as a routine quarterly check-in had now imploded into a full-blown crisis response summit. Dozens of executives, some with half-tied ties, others still cradling half-empty lattes, stared at the screen at the front of the room. On it, a paused frame from the viral video. Brielle Morgan, seated calmly in 1A, her boarding pass in one hand, phone in the other. Around her, chaos, uniforms, glares, and the stiff smile of Lorraine Chambers. The captions were unforgiving. "She built the system they're using to erase her. #Justice for Brielle. Skylux exposed. Ethics over privilege." Richard Vance stood at the head of the table, pale, arms stiff by his side. The CEO of Skylux Airlines had weathered PR storms before. A customer injury, a flight delay fiasco, even a threatened union strike. But this was seismic. The room was buzzing. His chief legal officer whispered, "The footage is being used by 3 major networks. Our legal exposure is significant." The head of PR shook her head. "We can't contain it. The hashtags are still climbing. #Justice for Brielle is now trending in 27 countries. Vance didn't blink. He couldn't, because his brain was still catching up to the last thing his VP of strategy had said. She's not just a customer. She's a strategic stakeholder. "What do you mean?" Vance had asked flatly, voice low. The answer had hit him like a gut punch. Right Tech owns 27% of Skylux equity through venture holding syndicates. Brielle Morgan controls every one of those votes. He'd staggered back, eyes searching the screen again, this time not for the woman's face, but for the signals he had missed. The steely posture, the stillness, the calculation. Not defiance. Leverage. "She has veto power," someone muttered from the far end of the table. "She could block any board decision if she wants." "Or worse," said the CFO, "she could call for a shareholder vote to unseat executive leadership." Vance gripped the table. His mouth was dry. "No one told me," he muttered. "We didn't know," said Evelyn Liu, his head of innovation. The shares were split across multiple vehicles, quietly acquired over the last 2 years. We assumed it was institutional flow. "She outmaneuvered us," the PR officer whispered. "No," Vance said. "She outplanned us." He turned back to the screen, The footage had been updated. New angle. Someone from 3C. Clear audio. Captain, before you proceed with the removal order, I'd advise you to check your inbox. And then came the twist. Not the public one. Everyone now knew she built the ethics AI. Everyone now knew she had been removed unjustly. No, this was the private twist. The one nobody outside that boardroom had connected yet. She created our accountability software, Evelyn said. The behavioral compliance framework. Every internal decision-making log, hers. She knows where every skeleton is buried, Vance breathed. Legal nodded grimly. She could expose hiring bias, loyalty abuse, customer discrimination trends, everything. There was silence. Then the director of data risk entered the room, a printed report in hand. She just triggered the audit clause in her partner agreement, he announced. It's official. We're under internal review. What kind of audit? Vance asked. A full one, the director replied. System-wide, customer data, loyalty enforcement, staff conduct. That clause gives her team real-time access. Vance sat down. Actually sat down. Not slowly, not symbolically. He collapsed into the leather chair like a man who'd just seen the bottom of a cliff from the wrong side of a fall. On the other side of the boardroom table, Evelyn scrolled through Brielle's LinkedIn profile. She read aloud. My mission is to turn AI from an instrument of convenience into a tool of ethical accountability. She looked up. She warned us, just not out loud. Vance stared at the image of Brielle on screen. Still in seat 1A, still not shouting, still not flinching. She's not even speaking, he muttered. She doesn't need to, said Legal. The system she built is doing it for her. Then came the final blow. An intern from Digital Comms, no older than 24, rushed into the room holding a tablet. There's a new video. One of the passengers uploaded a side-angle clip. Shows Lorraine Chambers slipping cash into Jessica's jacket pocket. Full view. The room fell into stunned silence. And, the intern added, hesitating, a third video from another angle shows Daniel Grant saying, "Don't fight the system, Miss Morgan. We can make this very unpleasant." Gasps. Vance rubbed his eyes. Tell me we didn't. You did, Evelyn said softly. We all did. Down the hallway, PR staff were already scrambling to draft statements. Legal was consulting with external counsel. Investors were calling every 10 minutes demanding clarity. But Richard Vance knew the truth before any of them said it out loud. This wasn't about salvaging reputation anymore. It was about survival. And Brielle Morgan, quiet, brilliant, unshakable in seat 1A, held every single key. At precisely 10:17 a.m., Brielle Morgan opened her tablet, connected to the plane's onboard Wi-Fi, and began drafting the final message. The sky outside the window stretched endless and calm. But inside the first-class cabin, and far beyond it, storms were already breaking. She had said almost nothing. Not to the press, not to the crew, not to the recording passengers. But now, in the digital language of corporate consequence, she was about to speak volumes. Subject line, urgent. Formal notice of action. Ethical breach. Stakeholder intervention required recipients. Richard Vance, CEO, Skylux Airlines. Skylux Executive Board. Skylux General Counsel, CC. RightTech Legal, Strategic Partners Group, Ethics Audit Oversight Board. Dear Mr. Vance and members of the board, as of 9:44 a.m. EST, I have formally initiated Phase 1 of Audit Response Protocols as defined under Clause 7.3 of our Joint Innovation Contract. The triggering incident was a direct ethical violation, captured on video, involving racial discrimination, bribery, and a breach of customer rights. The victim in question is myself, Brielle Morgan, founder and CEO of RightTech Solutions and controlling stakeholder of 27% equity in Skylux Airlines via investment syndicates. Here are my non-negotiable conditions for de-escalation. Immediate termination of the following personnel involved in the violation. Jessica Smith, lead flight attendant. Daniel Grant, Cabin Operations Supervisor. Captain Martin Miller, Flight Deck Commander. A formal public apology issued within 24 hours to be reviewed and approved by Right Tech legal and PR teams before publication. An emergency shareholder meeting scheduled no later than 5 o'clock a.m. is set today to review the board's response and proposed corrective actions. Failure to comply with the above will result in full public release of all unedited video footage from 3 independent passenger sources, including audio of coercive threats and monetary exchange. Immediate withdrawal of all equity holdings held by Right Tech and partner funds, valued at current market estimate of $312 million. Termination of our $80 million AI ethics and optimization contract, including revocation of software licenses, removal of back-end support, and deactivation of behavioral accountability frameworks. I urge you to consider the cost of silence versus the value of accountability. Sincerely, Brielle Morgan, founder and CEO, Right Tech Solutions lead stakeholder, Skylux Airlines. She reread it once. No dramatics, no threats masked as suggestions. Just clear consequence. And then, with one firm tap, she hit send. In the Skylux HQ boardroom, Vance's inbox pinged. The silence that followed could have cracked glass. His eyes scanned the message, twice, before he pushed his chair back slowly and stood. He handed the tablet to his general counsel, whose face blanched before he finished reading the second paragraph. "She's not bluffing," someone whispered. "Of course she's not," Vance snapped. But his voice lacked conviction. The head of strategy leaned forward. "If she pulls the plug on the Right Tech contract, we lose our entire AI backbone. We're not talking features. We're talking foundation." The CFO added, "And if she withdraws her equity stake, it signals a loss of confidence. Other institutional investors will follow. Stock will crash," murmured someone else. The general counsel cleared his throat. "We need to make a decision. Fast." Vance looked around the room, faces lined with anxiety, pride melting into fear. "She's asking us to fire 3 of our most senior personnel, in public. She's asking us to survive," Evelyn Liu replied. "There's a difference." Vance didn't speak for a moment. Then he turned to his assistant. "Get HR on standby. Prepare separation notices. All 3. Full terminations." The assistant nodded and bolted from the room. Then Vance turned to legal. "Draft an apology. No excuses, no passive language. I want it signed, stamped, and waiting for her team to approve by 1 o'clock p.m. He glanced down at the message again. "Emergency shareholder meeting." He sighed. "Set the call for 4:30 p.m. today." Back in the cabin, Brielle sat quietly, gaze fixed out the window as the clouds drifted past. Jessica had disappeared into the galley. Daniel had not returned since last speaking to the captain. Lorraine had finally put her phone down and stared blankly ahead, her shoulders no longer proud, her posture sagging under the weight of exposure. The flight hadn't even taken off, and already careers had been shattered, policies rewritten, a company turned inside out, and all without a single raised voice. She pulled out her phone again, tapped open a message thread labeled "Next Steps, Board Call." Brielle. Ultimatum delivered. Awaiting response. Natalie, head of comms. Media already suspecting terminations incoming. Press holding for official statement. Jason, legal. If they cave within the hour, we'll delay full footage release. But clock's ticking. Liam, strategy. Other airlines watching. You've got the industry's attention now. Brielle put the phone down and exhaled slowly. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt focused. This wasn't vengeance. This was structure. She had given them the tools. They chose not to use them. And now she was making sure they never forgot what happened when you ignore the system you were given to prevent the storm. Because it wasn't about the seat anymore. It was about every person who'd ever been removed, overlooked, silenced. Not because they lacked merit, but because someone else always sat there. Not today. Today, the system fought back. And its voice was hers. At exactly 1:02 p.m. ESTT, A formal press release went live on Skylux Airlines' official website, social media pages, and wire services. For immediate release. Subject: Executive response to ethical breach. Immediate personnel action. In light of the incident involving Platinum passenger Ms. Brielle Morgan aboard Flight 717, Skylux Airlines confirms the immediate termination of the following employees, effective today. Jessica Smith, Lead Flight Attendant Daniel Grant, Cabin Operations Supervisor Captain Martin Miller, Flight Commander. These individuals were found to have violated internal ethical standards, engaged in inappropriate prioritization of passenger treatment, and failed to uphold company values of inclusion, respect, and integrity. Skylux deeply regrets the incident and offers a formal apology to Ms. Morgan and all passengers impacted. A comprehensive internal review and system-wide reform will follow. The statement went viral in minutes. The public reaction was swift and exacting. In online comments, group chats, live streams, and comment sections, justice wasn't just welcomed, it was celebrated. Finally, accountability with teeth. They thought she was alone. They forgot she owns the building. Don't mess with someone who built the firewall you tried to hide behind. People around the world had been refreshing social feeds for hours. The names had trended. The footage had looped. The silence from Skylux had only fueled the anticipation. But now, the axe had fallen. 3 prominent employees. Gone. Not suspended. Not reassigned. Fired. And it wasn't buried in vague HR language. Their names were in bold. The reasons were crystal clear. The court of public opinion thundered with applause. And then, another headline hit. Breaking. Whitfield and Chambers LLP suspends senior partner Lorraine Chambers pending ethics review. A law firm known for its discretion, wealth management, and elite clientele had folded fast. Lorraine's face, once gracing the cover of Prestige Law Monthly, was now splashed across social feeds, her smug look from Seat 1A forever immortalized in memes. Privilege revoked. When your name trends for all the wrong reasons, you bribed the flight crew and lost everything but the Hermes bag. Within hours, her bio vanished from the firm's website. Screenshots circulated of her removal from executive pages, team photos, and marketing materials. She didn't respond to press inquiries, but her silence didn't stop the avalanche. The public, having watched her lean over Brielle's seat with disdain, now watched her fall with matching satisfaction. And yet, amid the chaos, one figure remained absent from all live statements, tweets, and interviews. Brielle Morgan. She didn't post a victory thread. She didn't take the podium. She didn't grant interviews to CNN, Forbes, or the dozens of outlets begging for a quote. Instead, she sent a short message to RightTech's internal Slack channel. This isn't retaliation. It's structural correction. Keep building. B. Internally, her team cheered, but quietly, because they understood. She didn't win anything today. She enforced a standard. That was the whole point. By mid-afternoon, news anchors scrambled to fill time with retrospectives. A career breakdown of Captain Miller's decades in aviation, Jessica Smith's rapid rise in Skylux's hospitality division, Daniel Grant's tight ship reputation, and the fear it apparently instilled. All of it undercut by one truth. They had used their power to protect privilege, not people. And Brielle? She had shown the world what real power looked like. Not loud, not angry, but inevitable. Inside Skylux HQ, the air was still heavy. The press room lights had barely cooled when Richard Vance returned to his office, unfastening his tie like it weighed 50 pounds. The board had backed him, barely. The terminations had gone through. The apology had been issued, but the fallout was far from over. Calls still poured in from shareholders demanding reform. All the while, Brielle remained quiet. She hadn't responded directly to him. No lawsuit, no campaign, just silence. It unnerved him more than fury ever could. At 4:00 p.m., Skylux's internal employee portal updated with a memo. Subject: mandatory ethics review protocols. Effective immediately. All staff would undergo new behavioral training programs. All customer interactions would now be monitored with expanded transparency metrics. All senior leaders would attend reform workshops led by an external advisory board appointed in part by Right Tech. In other words, Brielle had already started reprogramming the system, and she didn't even have to show up. Meanwhile, across the internet, one sentiment echoed louder than outrage. She didn't break the system, she rewrote it. At a quiet airport lounge, far from cameras and press, Brielle sipped herbal tea while reviewing a revised board briefing on her tablet. Her posture was relaxed, but her mind sharp. A young staffer from the lounge passed by and paused. She looked nervous, then softly said, "Miss Morgan, I just wanted to say thank you for what you did, for staying calm, for showing us something different." Brielle looked up, eyes kind but steady. "I didn't do it for applause," she said gently. "I did it so the next person like me doesn't have to go through it at all." The girl nodded, eyes misty, and walked away. And Brielle returned to her screen, already reviewing action plans for what came next. Because justice isn't just about what falls. It's about what rises after. The world expected Brielle Morgan to walk away. After all, she had every reason. She had won. The firings, the public apologies, the fall of those who tried to humiliate her. She could have burned the system down and walked through the smoke untouched. She could have sold her shares, taken her story to the media tour circuit, written a best-selling book about corporate racism, and cemented her name in history as the woman who dismantled Skylux Airlines. But she didn't. Instead, she sent a memo, not to the public, not to the press, but to the Skylux Board of Directors. Subject: Strategic Proposal, Long-Term Reform Initiative. The email wasn't fiery. It was clinical, strategic, calculated. But what it contained would become the most talked about twist of the entire saga. Proposal title: Second Sky, a Human Reformation Initiative Objective. To create an internal cultural reboot across the airline's customer service, hospitality, and executive leadership teams, rooted in education, empathy, and ethical rebuilding. Phase 1. A mandatory 6-month re-education program for key personnel involved in the incident, to be developed and overseen by Right Tech's new Behavioral Restoration Division. Phase 2. A company-wide rollout, including immersive training, community engagement, and post-program integration to measure transformation, not just compliance. First participants: Jessica Smith, Daniel Grant, Captain Martin Miller. The board was stunned. "What the hell is she doing?" asked Vance. "She's giving them a second chance," Evelyn replied softly. A silence followed, this time not from fear, but from something else. Disbelief laced with awe. "Is this mercy?" someone asked. "No," said the legal advisor. "This is strategy. She's rewriting what accountability looks like." The press got wind of it within hours. Second Sky, the CEO who was wronged, is now rebuilding the system that failed her. The public didn't know how to react at first. The comments were a storm of confusion, praise, and skepticism. She's rehiring the people who humiliated her? No, she's retraining them. What kind of leader does this? The kind who doesn't want revenge. She wants results. Others were more emotional. This is real power. Quiet, principled, visionary. She doesn't just want them gone. She wants them to grow. And behind the scenes, the 3 names at the center of it all sat silently in their respective living rooms, reading their invites to something they never thought they'd be offered again. A chance to learn, to unlearn, to return, not to their old jobs, but to humanity. The invitation was clear. You are not being asked to perform remorse. You are being given an opportunity to earn re-entry into a service industry that demands humility, empathy, and awareness. The cameras are gone, the spotlight is off, but the real work starts now. Jessica cried when she read it. Daniel didn't speak for 3 minutes, just stared at the email. Captain Miller called his daughter and said, "I think someone just saved my soul." The Second Sky program officially launched 2 weeks later in a quiet facility just outside of Denver. No press, no applause, no redemption story branding. Just a room of flawed people, willing to sit down and face what they had done and who they had been when they did it. And Brielle? She wasn't there. She had nothing left to prove, but her presence was embedded in every lesson plan, every training module, every mock customer interaction where participants were forced to confront not just bias, but who they had become under the comfort of power. On day 3 of the program, Jessica stood in front of a panel and reenacted her moment of silence during the incident. Not with excuses, with honesty. "I stayed quiet because I thought I'd lose my job," she said. "But I already lost my dignity the moment I let someone be degraded for my comfort. I don't want to be that person anymore." Daniel admitted, "I thought following protocol made me a good manager, but I never asked who wrote the protocol and who it hurt." Captain Miller took the longest to speak, but when he did, it was raw. "I thought neutrality was leadership, that if I didn't take sides, I was being fair. But silence has a side, and I was on the wrong one." Outside the program, public curiosity turned to admiration. Second Sky was no longer just a Brielle initiative. It became a model for airlines, hotels, banks, every service sector that had once whispered bias under the guise of policy. And still, Brielle stayed quiet. When asked by a journalist why she didn't appear at the launch ceremony, she replied simply, "Justice isn't a microphone, it's a mirror. They need to face themselves, not me." By the end of the 6-month program, something extraordinary had happened. Not because it made headlines, but because it didn't. The participants didn't return to their old positions. They chose to serve in new ones. Jessica joined Skylux's Customer Relations Training Unit. Daniel became a liaison for employee mental health and internal ethics enforcement. Captain Miller helped design flight deck cultural awareness protocols for trainee pilots. They weren't perfect, but they were different. They were real. And Brielle? She stayed the course. Quiet, steady, unshaken. Because her goal had never been to stand on a stage. It was to change what happened after the stage collapsed. It was the announcement no one expected to hear in modern aviation. Skylux Airlines to suspend operations for 48 hours. Company-wide training initiative. Begins immediately, 2 days. No flights, no check-ins, no takeoffs or landings, no first-class champagne service, no red-eye to Tokyo, no express shuttle to Miami. Just silence. The skies, once filled with the rhythmic hum of Skylux's sleek white and silver jets, were suddenly still. The tarmac emptied. Screens at airports across the country blinked with a rare message. All Skylux flights temporarily grounded. We are learning to serve again. It was, in the words of one journalist, the first corporate pause for conscience in aviation history. Inside Skylux's sprawling terminal at JFK, customer service counters had been replaced with empathy booths. Uniformed staff sat across from facilitators trained in social psychology, role-playing real-life scenarios that mirrored the very incident that had shaken their company to its core. A mock check-in desk displayed a sign. "This time, your assumptions stay at home." Cabin crew stood shoulder to shoulder in restructured workshops. Flight attendants practiced conflict resolution without hierarchy. Baggage handlers participated in bias simulations. Even pilots, once kings of the cockpit, sat in humble circles discussing power dynamics and microaggressions at 30,000 feet. At corporate HQ, executives traded their suits for anonymous name tags. Everyone started from scratch. On social media, the reaction was a tidal wave of stunned respect. An airline just grounded itself for ethics? That's wild. This is what real reform looks like. They're not just training for optics. They stopped making money to learn how to treat people. The initial skepticism gave way to collective awe. People didn't know whether to be shocked, impressed, or inspired. Some asked, "How can they afford this?" Others replied, How could they afford not to? Other airlines began to notice. At Delta's Atlanta HQ, a VP of operations forwarded Skylux's training program to their CEO. At Lufthansa, a roundtable was called to discuss potential cultural parallels. A Virgin executive tweeted, "Respect to Skylux. Accountability is contagious." And quietly, behind the scenes, emails began circulating across aviation leadership with one recurring subject line. Second Sky, should we explore similar models? At a press conference on day one of the shutdown, Skylux CEO Richard Vance stepped up to the podium. He looked different. Not just physically, his tie was gone, shirt sleeves rolled, but spiritually. The usual corporate polish had been stripped away. "I am not here to salvage a brand," he began. "I am here to acknowledge a breach, not just of trust, but of decency." Cameras clicked. Reporters leaned forward. "What happened on Flight 717 was not a one-off mistake," he continued. "It was the symptom of something systemic. And that system, if not rebuilt, will fail again. That's why, for 48 hours, we choose silence over revenue, learning over business, people over operations." He paused, scanning the audience. Then he added, with quiet sincerity, "This is not a PR maneuver. It's a reset." What made the shutdown even more impactful was its structure. It wasn't a top-down lecture. It was a full-loop transformation, role reversal modules, where crew members experienced what discrimination felt like from the customer's point of view. Story circles, where employees listened to passengers from marginalized communities recount real travel experiences. Accountability pods, small teams assigned to one another long-term, tracking behavior improvement post-training. Even the unions were involved, an unprecedented collaboration. And at the heart of it all, RightTech's Second Sky framework, built with Brielle's guidance and quietly deployed across every level. It wasn't branded, it wasn't flashy, it just worked. In private, Brielle watched the press conference from her office in New York, one hand resting on the windowsill, eyes fixed on the muted screen. Natalie, her head of communications, turned to her. "They quoted you twice." Brielle didn't smile. "They didn't quote me," she said. "They're finally listening." Meanwhile, a CNN segment aired a deep dive report titled "Justice at 35,000 Feet: How One Woman Grounded a Giant and Lifted an Industry." The report showed split screens of the viral video and footage from the new training camps. Jessica, now in a blue polo labeled Second Sky Mentor, was shown leading a small group of younger flight attendants through empathy drills. Captain Miller was seen sitting in a mock passenger seat, eyes closed, as a recording played subtle comments from past passengers of color describing how they were politely overlooked and consistently downgraded. The narrator intoned, "In an era of surface apologies and shallow reforms, Skylux grounded its aircraft and its ego. Not for optics, for something far rarer, growth." Passengers affected by the Flight 717 incident were also invited to participate. The man from 3C, who had stood up for Brielle, joined a training day in Chicago. The woman from 2F, who had recorded the bribery exchange, led a storytelling session titled, "When Silence Isn't Neutral." Their participation transformed the narrative from victim versus institution into something more collective, a movement. By the end of day 2, Skylux flights were ready to resume, but they wouldn't take off the same way. The first plane scheduled to depart, Flight 301 from LAX to JFK, delayed its boarding by 5 minutes for a message from the gate agent. She stood at the mic and said, "Before we board, I want to thank every one of you for being part of our journey to do better. We aren't perfect, but we've stopped pretending, and we're learning now, together." There was no applause, just stillness. And then, one by one, passengers boarded. Some with tears, others with small nods of appreciation. Because the sky hadn't just gone silent, it had started over. 3 months after the world watched Skylux Airlines shut down its skies to relearn how to serve with dignity, a quiet announcement appeared on the company's internal network. "Today, 3 former employees will speak, not to defend, not to excuse, but to share. It wasn't a mandatory meeting. No cameras were required, no press invites. And yet, over 8,000 employees across the company, pilots, crew, execs, janitorial staff, logged in or gathered in lounges, conference rooms, and training centers to watch the live stream. What they were about to witness wasn't scripted. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect. It was raw. And it changed everything again. First to step up was Jessica Smith. She stood at the podium in a modest blue blouse, her Skylux ID no longer marked with lead flight attendant, but instead labeled simply Staff Support, 2nd Sky Division. Her hands trembled slightly, but when she spoke, her voice carried more than words. It carried a reckoning. "I thought being nice was enough," she began. "I thought smiling at passengers and offering them wine made me a good person." She looked up. Her eyes were wet. "But when I was asked to protect privilege, I did. When I was given the chance to speak up, I stayed silent. When I was offered money to ignore injustice, I took it." Gasps filled some rooms. Others sat frozen. Jessica continued. "I wasn't malicious. I was compliant. I thought going along was survival. But now I see. Every moment I went along, someone else paid the price." She paused. "I want to say to Brielle Morgan, thank you for not just holding me accountable, but for giving me the chance to face who I had become. I may never be the same, but that's the point." The audience didn't clap. They absorbed. Because this wasn't performance. It was penance. Next came Daniel Grant. He stood taller, still bearing the stiffness of someone trained to control spaces, but his shoulders were lower now. His tone, softer. "I was known for order," he began. "Punctuality, discipline, structure." He glanced down, then back up. "But I never questioned what that structure protected." He walked slowly across the stage. "Every time I enforced protocol, I told myself I was serving the system, but I never asked, whose system? Built by whom? For whom?" He shook his head. "I told Brielle not to fight the system, but now I understand. It was never the system that needed protecting. It was the people the system ignored." A murmur ran through the crowd. Daniel placed a hand on the podium. "I used to think leadership meant keeping things running smoothly. Now I know real leadership is stopping everything when it's going wrong." He stepped back. A long silence followed. A reverence, not for who he was, but for who he had the courage to become. Finally, the lights dimmed. A single spotlight lit the center of the stage. Captain Martin Miller walked out, uniform pressed, flight cap in hand. He looked older, not from time, but from transformation. He stood silently for a moment, then said, "I was in command of thousands of flights in my life. I've landed in typhoons, diverted mid-air emergencies, once landed a jet with one engine down." He gave a wry, tired smile. "But nothing scared me more than having to look into the mirror after Flight 717. The room fell absolutely still. "I always believed in fairness," he said. "I believed that by staying neutral, I was being just. I didn't shout at Brielle. I didn't insult her. I simply followed policy." He paused, looked around. "But silence isn't neutral. Neutrality isn't justice." He stepped forward, his voice low but resolute. "Brielle Morgan didn't just sit in seat 1A. She held a mirror to all of us, and I saw a man who valued comfort over courage." He placed his captain's hat gently on the podium. "And I want my future legacy to reflect a different kind of pilot. One who knows the most powerful position in the sky is the one that protects every voice on board." The stream ended, but the echoes had only just begun. Clips from the speeches spread like wildfire. Jessica's quiet confession. Daniel's reflection on order over people. Captain Miller placing his hat on the podium like a soldier laying down arms. It hit the world harder than outrage ever could. Because this wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about possibility. On social media, the response was thunderous and deeply human. This made me cry harder than the firings. Forgiveness is real when change is visible. I never thought I'd say this, but respect to them for facing it. Even people who had once demanded only heads now paused. They watched. They listened. They felt. In boardrooms, schools, leadership retreats, those clips were replayed. In HR departments, the phrase, "neutrality isn't justice," was printed and taped to break room doors. In aviation circles, other airlines began calling Skylux, not to copy, but to learn, to listen, to face their own mirrors. And through it all, Brielle Morgan remained quiet. Until one day, a reporter caught her leaving a speaking event and asked, "How did it feel to watch the 3 people who wronged you stand up and own it?" She stopped, thought for a moment, then replied, "It felt like the sky got a little lighter." The auditorium was silent. The kind of silence that swells, stretches, and waits, not from boredom, but from reverence. Thousands had gathered, and millions more watched the live broadcast. The backdrop bore no logos, no slogans, no hashtags. Just one line in white letters across navy blue. Justice isn't a seat, it's a standard. The woman who inspired it sat center stage. Brielle Morgan stepped up to the podium, no script in hand. She wore a simple navy blazer, her signature curls pinned back, and a small silver pin on her lapel, an open wing, symbol of both aviation and freedom. She paused before speaking, eyes scanning the crowd, then down into the camera that would beam her message across the country and beyond. "I never wanted this spotlight," she began. Her voice was calm, unwavering. "I never sat in seat 1A because I needed to be seen. I sat there because I had earned it, just like anyone else." A murmur moved through the crowd, not surprise, but recognition. Everyone remembered the footage, the stillness, the dignity, the refusal. I was asked to move, not because I broke a rule, but because someone else was more familiar to the system than I was, because privilege had become standard. She paused. And that's the real problem. It's not that people have privilege. It's that systems are built to protect it, at the cost of fairness, decency, and truth. Her words hung in the air, heavy and cleansing. When I was removed from that plane, I could have responded with rage. I had every legal, financial, and ethical right to dismantle Skylux Airlines from the inside out. She took a breath, not for drama, but to honor the weight of what came next. But I chose something harder, to rebuild. She looked straight into the camera. Because justice isn't revenge, it's responsibility. And leadership isn't about taking the loudest seat, it's about raising the standard for every seat. The audience erupted. Not in a standing ovation, yet, but in that subtle seismic emotional release that marks the shift from admiration to awe. Brielle continued, "I didn't want more seats for people who look like me. I wanted better standards for everyone. We don't need to fight for scraps of respect. We need to change the recipe." Applause now. Real, thunderous applause. And that's why we created Second Sky, not as a punishment machine, but as a second chance engine. Because if we want change to last, it must live beyond the headlines and inside the people who made the mistakes. She paused, letting the crowd absorb it. 3 people who once dismissed me now teach others how not to repeat that error. That's not just reform. That's reflection. A large screen behind her came to life. Clips played of Jessica leading team huddles, Daniel mentoring young supervisors, Captain Miller addressing a new flight academy class. The crowd didn't cheer. They cried, because this was no longer a scandal. It was a standard. Brielle stepped to the side of the podium. A journalist from The Atlantic would later write that this moment, when she stood off center and still held the room like gravity itself bent around her, marked the moment a CEO became something more. She continued softly, but firmly. "Let me be clear. What happened on Flight 717 should have never happened. Not to me, not to anyone, but it did. And what we choose to do after such moments defines who we are, not just as a company or an industry, but as a society." The room was silent again. "And I'm telling you right now, if justice can be delayed by a seat, then Justice was never strong enough to begin with. She returned to center stage. So let's build something better. Outside the auditorium, the clip began to circulate before she'd even finished speaking. Within 30 minutes, it was the #1 trending video across every major platform. We don't need more seats. We need better standards. Justice isn't revenge, it's responsibility. Raise the standard, not just the voices. Clips flooded classrooms, corporate Slack channels, HR newsletters. Even airline competitors played the speech during internal town halls. One Southwest pilot wrote, "I showed this to my crew. We cried. Then we changed our onboarding protocol." A Delta executive posted, "Her story wasn't just about Skylux. It was about all of us. We needed her wake-up call." And across social media, people reshared the now iconic image of Brielle standing at the podium, flanked not by security or lawyers, but by her own calm. Weeks later, Skylux resumed full operations. Flight 717 was scheduled again. Same route, same aircraft model. But this time, there was a ceremony. Quiet, unflashy, respectful. Every passenger boarding the flight received a small card at check-in. "Your seat is more than a number. It's your right. Welcome to the new standard." And in seat 1A, Brielle Morgan. Not because she demanded it, not because she owned the airline, not because the company owed her, but because this time, justice had been properly assigned. As the plane prepared for takeoff, a flight attendant approached her, not with fear or condescension, but with genuine respect. "Miss Morgan, would you like anything before we taxi?" Brielle smiled softly. "A glass of water, please. And maybe just a moment to breathe." The attendant nodded. As the aircraft lifted into the sky, the cabin felt different. Not just quieter, not just more civil, more aware. The passengers knew they weren't just flying to a destination. They were riding the tailwinds of a standard that would ripple across the world. In the weeks that followed, Brielle turned down every major interview offer. Instead, she wrote a short op-ed in the New York Times. The power of justice lies not in the seat it occupies, but in the standard it refuses to lower. We must stop waiting to be seated at the table of fairness. We must raise the table itself. The piece went viral because the world wasn't just listening anymore. It was learning. At the end of that day, as Flight 717 touched down safely, one passenger turned to Brielle and said, "You know, you never raised your voice." Brielle replied, "I didn't need to. I raised the bar."